The media landscape has changed significantly in recent years, from consolidation, downsizing, and the outright closing of many major news outlets to a major shift in the way that information is disseminated. My name is Steve Gelsi. I'm a financial journalist and host of this panel. I'm on the board of the New York Financial Writers Association and was president back in 2008. I did not cause the financial crisis. I'd like to thank our executive director, Britt Tunick, and New York Financial Writers president, Olivia Carville, for their support in setting up this event, as well as thanking our host, NYU, and Peter Coy, our former president as well, who brought me back onto the board a couple years ago. So thank you. I'm excited to introduce our star panel. We have a Pulitzer Prize winner, Jesse Eisinger, an American investigative journalist and author, won a Pulitzer in 2011 for his work covering shady bank dealings that contributed to the global financial crisis. He worked on the New York Financial Writers. He also helped win the New York Financial Writers Association Impact Award for his editing role in the ProPublica series on billionaire donors, providing free trips to and other perks to members of the U.S. Supreme Court. And on that front, just last week, Justice Clarence Thomas acknowledged he should have disclosed some of those, a lot of those gifts. And I'm sure he'll talk about a little bit more of that in a minute. And my colleague from MarketWatch is here, Beth Pinsker, financial columnist and soon to be author of My Mother's Money, book coming out, I guess, in 2025, right? Next year, putting the finishing touches on the reporting on that now. And believe it or not, this is a perfect example of what we're talking about today. Beth started out as a film critic, and now she's a certified financial planner, worked for different publications in different media, as she likes to say, from the Oscars to interest rates. That's what her career spans. And then we've got the wonderful Shelly Banjo, managing editor of global business at Bloomberg News, where she leads team coverage of the largest U.S. corporations. She's also worked in newspapers and podcasts, and has found time somehow to get an MBA. I guess what, you were studying on the subway or something, I guess, I don't know. And David Jeans, who's written for Fairfax Media to my left, the New York Times, and now is covering defense and technology as an investigative reporter for Forbes. I'm pleased to say that a paperback version of his book, Wonder Boy, about the founder of Zappos.com has been out this year as well. And I also fit in with the panel too, because I cover banks and cannabis for MarketWatch, but I was originally a newspaper reporter. I've done TV segments, I've done internet segments, I had a podcast. So, you know, as we all know, we're all brands. You know, each journalist is a brand, and your brand has to be able to reach into any kind of distribution that you can find. So I'd like to turn it over to each panelist and to tell their story about existing in more than one universe at a time as a journalist. It's tricky. You have to keep your boss happy and then also try to do other things at the same time with other bosses, other department heads, other publications. So it's difficult. In fact, just as a personal note, I used to use a pseudonym to write about cannabis because I didn't want Dow Jones to know about it. So what I'm talking about specifically is going from text to podcasts to books to magazines to video to TV, and for the past 10 years or so, of course, social media. I don't know how far we'll get into discussion, but we'll also want to figure out how we're going to evolve in the world of AI. We'll probably touch on that, which may require different skill sets. And another related topic we can also touch on is how to change careers, because we had a few career changes in here as well, it's similar, you know, using your skills and your discipline to translate into another type of job is somewhat related to this topic that we're doing. So I'm going to start the ball rolling with origin stories for the panelists and how they got interested in financial journalism and tapping different media. So that as a backdrop, let's tell our origin stories. Jesse Eisinger, let's start with you. How'd you get interested in journalism and financial journalism, and were you always attracted to different media? I also want to flag that you're the author of the Chicken Shit Club, Why the Justice Department Fails to Prosecute Executives. Jesse, take it away.
Thank you. I'm flattered to go first. Thank you for, I'm sad that I have to go first. But I'll give the abbreviated story. I can talk about myself for a very long time. So, but I graduated from college a very long time ago, sadly, and had no aspiration to go into journalism. Wanted to go to Eastern Europe because the wall had just fallen, which approximately dates me. My girlfriend at the time wanted to go to a Spanish-speaking country, so of course, we went to a Spanish-speaking country. And to show what my journalistic instincts were at the time, we decided to go to the most stable and uneventful country we could think of, safest country we could think of, so we went to Chile. And there I was, having no idea what to do, and fell into journalism. And so my first job, I got fired.
So did I.
That was a brief, incompetent escapade, and then I became a financial reporter for a place called the South Pacific Mail. It was an English language business newsletter, and I had never done any journalism. I didn't know anything about business. I didn't know anything about finance, and I spoke French, but I didn't speak Spanish, which turns out they speak Spanish in Chile. So those were all deficits. I wouldn't recommend it, but I did spend a year learning all of those things and doing all of them at various degrees of incompetence. But I gradually kind of realized over time and over the subsequent years that I actually love journalism. I ended up working for Quick Nikkei News with John Jacobs over there, and was always thinking that I was going to quit journalism and become an academic like my dad and my grandfather. And then I realized that my intellect was much more suited for journalism about 5 or 6 years in, and I also realized that business and finance, which I knew nothing about growing up, I don't think we had no business people who were friends of my parents. And it sort of dawned on me that this is the way the world worked, and that you should know something about it. And so I became a business and financial journalist. I covered biotechnology at Dow Jones Newswires and TheStreet.com, working my way through breaking stories and writing every day, and sort of gravitated to liars, con men, cheats, because biotech was a great area for me and a great area to become a journalist, because it's at the nexus of kind of genius and fraud. There are these brilliant scientists who want to save the world with their medicines, and then there are charlatans who want to prey on the hopes and dreams and fears of sick people. And you could write about both. So there's extraordinary human drama. So I learned that there was a lot of fraud, and I gravitated to those stories, and I kind of became accidentally a financial journalist, a business journalist, and an investigative journalist, and that was sort of my origin.
How were you able to change gears? Because you were in a wire service, you worked for the internet. How'd you sort of like working in those different mediums, and how are you able to transfer those skills? What's the common denominator there? Just like determination.
Who hired me, so where I got the job. I was very, very, at every stage of my career, I've been extraordinarily lucky. And every time I was getting a little bit bored, I had another job kind of come up. So at the moment that I was sort of worried about, sort of that Quick Nikkei News wasn't sort of working out for me, Quick Nikkei News was a disaster. The other lucky thing in my career was the first 2 years I worked for publications that literally had no readers, so all of the disastrous mistakes and incompetence that I expressed, no one could see, and it's now flushed down the memory hole, so no one can bring it back. So I was very flexible. I worked for wire services. I worked for an internet publication very early on. I've worked for magazines. I've also done every conceivable financial column known to man. I've done a daily, a weekly, a bi-weekly, and a monthly column. I was always very curious, which is what a journalist has to be. I was undaunted in a very kind of stupid and arrogant way to sort of throw myself into finance and biotech, knowing nothing about finance or tech or bio or science. But I always sort of felt like I could learn, and it was a kind of, that arrogance was not a quality I'm particularly proud of looking back on it, but I think that it helped me kind of write quickly and write things that about things that I didn't fully understand. And I actually think it's a really important skill that I tell my reporters now, mostly I'm an editor now, that you don't actually have to know everything about a subject to write about it. And particularly with investigative reporters, they feel like they cannot write word one until they are masters of the subject. And so they get voluminous material and then drown in it. And my problem was not that. My problem was more like, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I probably shouldn't be writing about it, but I wrote about it anyway. Mainly, if you get news, if you're a scoop artist, then you can write something that's new.
So what I'm hearing there is that you felt as if your skills were transferable, and indeed they were, and your curiosity was a big factor in all that. And and also another thing you said on our prep call is that like you think you weren't afraid to fail, or you did fail and you picked yourself up again, and you said a lot of young journalists feel as if they have to get it all right away, right out of the gate. So that was one of the things we were talking about at one point.
Yeah, I mean, I made a lot of mistakes. Mostly I made mistakes. But the mistakes were not so catastrophic. Most of the mistakes were in missing opportunities for bigger stories and thinking bigger. But I made a lot of like really dumb errors, but those were the early years when nobody was reading. But I think that, I was sort of stupid enough to not know my limitations for a while.
Yeah.
And very lucky that I wasn't taking this, I was very, very competitive and extremely ambitious, but also didn't take journalism seriously as kind of my life goal at the same time. So I wasn't at 26 or 28 thinking that I should be writing New Yorker stories or winning the Pulitzer. In fact, when I won the Pulitzer, it was very accidental and very surprising. And I hadn't ever had time to kind of aspire to it. I was a business reporter, so I aspired to a loaf. And then this thing fell on my head.
You mean the Loeb Award, which is the business.
The Loeb Award was the prestigious business award, and that's the thing as a business reporter that I aspired to. And then I wrote this series of stories with a colleague of mine at ProPublica that ended up winning the Pulitzer, and obviously that was great and career changing.
Yeah.
Because people attach such importance to it. I mean, it really is lucky, and it's completely accidental, and it has to do with lots of contingencies that you have no control over, and it's very arbitrary. But when I won it, then I was now I have to demonstrate that I'm worthy of it, and then that sort of galvanized me to do something else. And I was desperately afraid that I would get Pulitzer disease, where I wouldn't be able to produce anything because everything had to be great. So I was not paralyzed by that. I was sort of galvanized to come there and produce.
Yeah, just every time you do a really, really good story, I mean, the next day you're like, uh-oh, now I got to do another one. Shelly, you're up. Origin story.
I don't know how to follow that one.
Yeah.
I'll try my best.
Sorry, I didn't think you would.
No, the origin is quite completely the opposite. I always wanted to write from a very young age. Loved writing, wrote books, little books when I was little, and then high school newspaper, college newspaper, magazines, yada yada. I started my career at the Wall Street Journal as an intern. To this day, I'm most proud of the A-head I wrote on my internship, which is about beer pong entrepreneurs.
Wait, remember what it was, the headline?
The headline was like onomatopoeia. It was like block pitching, like whatever,
Oh, okay.
that kind of thing.
Yeah. You're making me thirsty.
Yeah, it's about this burgeoning, cottage industry of beer pong entrepreneurs that only a 21-year-old college student could write. And that was the first lesson from the great editor, I'm sure some of you guys know, Brian Gruley, to write what you know, write what you see, write what you know, write what's around you. So I spent the first 8 years of my career at the Wall Street Journal getting the best journalism education that your meager paycheck can buy, and it was great. I was covering the financial crisis. I joined in 2007, then the world fell apart. So it's wonderful to be right there in the center of it, covering personal finance, wealth management, and finance in general, working with really amazing reporters who let me, be that young gopher reporter and do their bidding. So that was really fun. And then when Rupert Murdoch bought the paper, he decided his pet project would be launching the Greater New York section of the Wall Street Journal, which was fun. It was starting up, like a tabloid within the Wall Street Journal. So that was great. Those were really fun days where you could write, local New York stories but for a global audience.
Just a quick question on the early part. When you grew up and you were a high school, editor, paper, writer for the school paper, were you interested in business journalism, or was it just maybe you wanted to fish where the fish are? There were more opportunities there. I mean, that's kind of what drew me to it to some extent too.
No, I was a double major in international studies. I studied abroad in different places, Madrid, South Africa. I was not interested in business journalism, but I got denied for 49 internships, and then the 50th internship was the Wall Street Journal, and so I bought a copy of the newspaper on my flight to do the interview, and I read it cover to cover, and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And I had a pen out, and I was like circling. I never read the Wall Street Journal before, and then Brian Gurley, that editor, taught me that everything is a business story.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah,
you're hooked.
Yeah. I worked for a community newspaper up in New Hampshire, and there was always a pocketbook angle to everything. Usually it was taxes. But anyway. So you're working with a lot of younger reporters now, and you encourage them to try different things, or and you got an MBA, and so talk about your MBA for a second.
Sure. So while at the Wall Street Journal, I decided to do a part-time MBA. I thought I would maybe leave journalism because I had this lunch with a source at the time who said, you write these great stories about all these amazing people doing great things. Don't you want to be one of those amazing people doing great things? Yeah, I do. So I went to business school, and then I graduated, and I did all these interviews with companies, and everything was about PowerPoint presentation this and PowerPoint presentation that, and I was like, do not want to spend the rest of my life making PowerPoint presentations. So I went back to journalism, and I said, do not want to sit in an office ever again. That sounds terrible. I want to go talk to interesting people and have this license that we all get to go talk to people and dig and learn about stuff every single day. I tossed out that idea. I jumped ship though. I went to Quartz, which was just the hot new startup at the moment, owned by The Atlantic at the time, redefining business journalism for the global set, as they said, and that was great. It gave me a real education on audience, the importance of headlines. As a reporter at the Wall Street Journal at that time, you never cared about headlines. You just wrote the articles. The headlines were things that the editors, figured out. And then you go to digital media and you realize, well, it's completely backwards. Like, you need to know everything about the headlines and write a wonderful headline, because that's the only thing people are judging you on the click on the story. Yeah. So that was a fantastic education in audience development, and then Bloomberg, they were launching this thing at the time called Bloomberg Gadfly. They were trying to be like the Lex column in the FT or the Heard on the Street column in Wall Street Journal, and they wanted a fast commentary site. So I joined Bloomberg that way. I'm writing opinion columns, and I've been at Bloomberg for about 8 years, doing all sorts of things. So I went to Hong Kong, spent a few years there, switched back to news reporting, wrote about the tech, U.S.-China tech trade war. That's when I got hooked on ByteDance, the company behind TikTok, at a time when nobody knew what TikTok was, and I had to fly to New York and convince my editor at Business Week that we need to write a story about TikTok. And they were like, what? What is that? So we wrote the first Business Week story about TikTok, and then that turned into a big podcast all about it. And it's all back in the news again, which is interesting but traumatic a little bit for me. And then I went on, decided I want to be a manager, and so I switched course there. And now I've been managing our New York bureau and now our global business.
So what's your common denominator? What enabled you to succeed in so many different ways? And how can other people, you know, if they're in a print publication, maybe they want to move to a different type of, maybe they want to do video or they want to do podcasts. You know, what's your advice on that?
Yeah, I think you just go where the story is. Like, you know, it doesn't really matter how you tell the story. It's just that you sort of go where the story is. And so, first, you know, you're doing all of it at once. At this stage, as a journalist, you really need to be able to do anything. There is no such thing as a print journalist anymore. You know, you've got to be able to write quick news and break scoops, break news, get scoops, write the big feature story, go on the podcast, go on video. I mean, at Bloomberg, you never really work for one platform. You sort of just go where the story is, and then it happens to go across all these different.
Yeah, Bloomberg has everything. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you know, but you know, there are some things that, like, if you're not comfortable in front of a crowd, you may not want to do TV camera work. You know, but if you're comfortable in front of a crowd, it's a good place for you. If you want to just be in your office writing stuff, then you just, you know, maybe you just stay in print. Or if you're an audio person, if you really like the sounds of things, maybe you want to try to do a podcast. So a little bit depends on where you're, you know, playing to your own strengths, I think, you know, to some extent. Anyway, Beth, you're up.
Well, there's no straight line from film critic to financial planner. So, like, there's no way that I can really explain it. My first internship was at Late Night with David Letterman. And from there I went to Entertainment Weekly. And if I went through the rest of my resume, it would take hours because I've been laid off from literally every publication in the universe. I've written for dailies, weeklies, monthlies, trade publications, wire service, like everything in the universe. But it's been like 30 years of bouncing around from a lot of different things. In 2022, I had 3 different employers. You know, like, I just get in, like, I went through the whole .com bust. But what really, you know, I did solid entertainment journalism for the first half of my career in various places, either freelance or on staff.
Any favorite celebrities from that time? Or?
Oh God, all of them. I mean, I have the craziest stories. Like, one I tell every year on the O.J. Simpson anniversary is that I watched the O.J. Simpson Bronco run with David Hasselhoff and Marla Trump. Like, you know, I went to the Titanic Oscar party and snuck in at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they had just run out of ice. And I'm like, I could go to bed now because that's my leave. And I call it in from like a, you know, there weren't even cell phones back then. You know, call it in from like a payphone from my, or like something from my car, like I dialed in somehow. And I remote filed the story of the Dallas Morning News, you know, from outside the tent of the Titanic party. You know, I got yelled at by Harvey Weinstein a number of times, but not sexually harassed. He was just mad at me. And, you know, like, just nutso things. I've had directors fall asleep in a drug haze in the middle of an interview. Like, I've had to
Why did you leave that? Oh my God.
I had to interview a dog once. And that was really challenging. That was really early in my career. I just didn't know what to make of that.
I had never heard of that. I did a man bites dog story once, but I never interviewed a dog. So how do you convince people to hire you if they don't have the, you know, the exact job skills that they're looking for? What's the trick there? Not trick, but what's the art of that?
I think the terms fail upward. Like, one job has always led to the next for me, and when I stopped being a full-time film critic, which was sometime in like 1998 or so, I moved back to New York and just started freelance. And more the pitches that I was doing were like the business of entertainment. And then I ended up in a startup, which, talk about failing upward, inside.com, if any of you remember that publication. Yeah, see, came and went. I ended up at inside.com, and I was like a media business reporter. And from there, I just sort of got more into media business, more straight business, just doing that. And I ended up coming back from maternity leave. I was working for AOL at the time. And they're like, we're going to start a personal finance website. Do you want to take that on? And I'm like, that sounds like me. I got 2 kids at home, and it was 2008. It was just at the start of the recession, and I was running a site about frugality and how to save money, and it became a big thing until they just shut it down, like they do everything I work on. When I fill out my job applications and have to like list, you know, like fill out that electronic application, and you have to put like the name and address of your former employer, they don't exist. Like I don't even know what to put. I don't even know what to put in those spaces. Just like they're not even, nobody even remembers them. So I'm like the kiss of death. I'm worried about market.
No, you're helping MarketWatch very, very much with your advice columns. They're very popular.
So
and we'll get to your book project in a minute.
But I just kind of landed there, like, and if you want to know, like, I landed there because of LinkedIn. For any of you out there who are searching for jobs, but I knew I was being cut from the project I was on. I had gone to the Wall Street Journal for a marketing type project, and I knew my head was about to get chopped off. And so I buffed up my LinkedIn profile, and I made sure that everybody I needed to be on there. And I think one of you is out here in the audience somewhere, George. I made sure like people like George were friends with me on LinkedIn, and then I announced that I was leaving, you know, laid off or fired or whatever you want to call it. And you know, the head of MarketWatch called me like the next day.
Was it Jeremy?
No, it was
Oh,
Mark.
yeah. Oh, it was Mark. Okay.
Yeah, so Mark called me the next day. He's like, I think we got a position.
Mark DeCambra, our editor.
Yeah, and he's like, I think you might have a position. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. It's like, that can't be. And like 3 months later, I started there. So, and by that point, I didn't have a care in the world. I didn't like play by any rules, and I just set myself free, and it worked out great for me. So.
That's great. That's great. David, you have a tough act to follow, but you've got some interesting things to say in your evolution as well. You know.
I'll do my best.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a vague memory growing up in Australia of wanting to be like a new age Rupert Murdoch, and you know he had like grown up. He'd started his career not far from where I grew up.
Does he have a good legacy in Australia?
We talk about it after this
Okay.
conversation. But I started after, you know, I went to, you know, a university that, you know, had some journalism classes, but my first job was as a police reporter in a regional city outside of Melbourne, and I, you know, doing police reporting, you see the best and the worst of humanity in very sort of interesting environments, especially in a regional city. And so it was, you know, I feel like I learned a lot of my chops there, but I also learned that if I was going to write about people who, you know, and write adversarial stories and look into people's backgrounds, I wanted to do it where more people would care, because I had this incident occur. I mean, there was a number of, when you live in a small town, everyone sort of knows where you live. And, you know, there was this one guy who set up a furniture shop, and it turned out to be, you know, he closed it overnight, and all these, you know, grannies and people who bought couches lost their money. And so I was going to figure out who this guy was and like tell everyone that he had ripped everyone off. And I did that. That made me realize, I was like, okay, I know I want to stay being a reporter. I know I want to stay finding out, you know, who's doing what right and wrong and highlighting that, but I want to do it where it may have more impact. And so, you know, did a few other things before going to Columbia Journalism School in 2016 to the Investigations Fellowship. And one thing I'll say about Australia is, you know, there was always this sort of mindset there that, you know, you had to earn your chops for 10, 15 years before you could, you know, dream of being on an investigations desk at The Age or Sydney Morning Herald. And I was a little bit too impatient for that, and, you know, if I could just go to school to do investigations, then that's what I was going to do. So I went to Columbia. You know, like most people who, you know, do their masters, they have to, you know, I did a lot of freelancing, and, you know, as I was doing that, I actually was a fact checker at the New York Times, and I pitched Kevin McKenna, who's in the audience here, Cole, on an ambitious reporting project, and that led to a string of stories, which were very helpful clips for getting me a job. And my visa was about to run out when the Real Deal, which covers real estate news
Right.
in New York, is kind of like the page 6 of real estate, and it's so much fun. And before that, I had done very little business reporting at all. You know, I'd always just thought like, you know, kind of like the police reporter mindset, and you know, who's being harmed, and then, you know, sort of what you said, Shelly, like, there's a business story in everything, and you can personify, you know, all those stories. So at the Real Deal, I really, you know, learned what a Series A funding round was. I learned what a mezzanine loan was. I learned all these things that, you know, were an education in themselves. And then just in terms of like sourcing New York high-profile people at events and conferences, and it felt like another new set of chops that I learned there. And at the time, I was covering a lot of WeWork's downfall. And so Forbes took notice of that, and then Forbes hired me, and I started at Forbes in the first week of the pandemic, and I didn't meet any of my colleagues for 18 months. And what actually happened though, during that time, while the pandemic occurred, you know, I was covering the cloud wars, and I was covering, you know, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. There was so much free money at the start of 2020, so there was a lot of startups being built that were just, you know, kind of rotten. And so I was
Yeah, it was kind of a bubble in 2020,
It was,
2021, for sure.
So I was sort of diving in, like, you know, there was one AI company that said that they did accounting for small businesses with the click of an AI, and it was just 500 people in the Philippines doing it manually. So there was, you know, a lot of stuff like that happening that it was almost like a playbook. And, you know, from there, went on to do, I took notice of Sam Bankman-Fried and did some work on highlighting crypto frauds, and there was a new template of fraud there. And then, maybe I skipped over this one note, but at the end of 2020, Tony Hsieh, who was the CEO of Zappos, he passed away after a bit of a battle with drug addiction and mental health issues. And that was rather stark, given the fact that he had built a legacy on delivering happiness. That was the name of the book that he wrote, and he was very widely read among business people as a way that, you know, have good corporate culture. And myself and a colleague, we were working at Forbes and broke you know, basically sort of wrote a big story about his life, who he was and why he mattered, and had this really sort of shocking letter that the singer Jewel had written to him a few months before he died. And I think it sort of added a bit of a Hollywood element to our story. And from that, a couple of days after the story published, we got a book deal, which, you know, I'd just been at Forbes for 9 months, and I was like, there's pretty good work in here, like, you know. So I got, and maybe what Jesse said, like, I got incredibly lucky. Like, I just so happened to, you know, get onto that story, and we had my career and my colleague's career sort of got upended within 48 hours. You know, we started on that story, 2 days later the story was out, and all of a sudden it was, you know, a book opportunity, which was something that I didn't think I'd be doing for another decade, but always was perhaps something I wanted to do. And and probably my last little thing I'll just add is that the book came out last year in April, and
What's the title again? Wonder Boy?
Wonder Boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And hopefully it's going to get a feature from a film, but we'll see.
Oh, wow.
Well, you can go and Google it.
Yeah, option.
Yeah, that occurred.
You never know, yeah.
But you never know. I mean, you have to,
Yeah.
if it happens. But after that came out, I was sort of, you know, the book had come out. I'd done crypto, I'd done cloud, and I just was looking for my new beat. And we were trying to figure out a way to cover AI meaningfully. And there were so many different angles that a lot of reporters at a lot of other publications were trying to think about in how to, you know, OpenAI was the main story, but like there was a lot of other AI waves occurring, and so that I basically learned that there was a lot of hype going to defense technology and AI being used to help defense applications. And unlike the previous applications of accounting for a small business, if you are making a missile and you don't say what you're doing, you know, accurately, then the chance of something going wrong and the consequences of that are much more significant. So that's kind of the thesis of the new thing I'm sort of working on, which is this intersection of Silicon Valley and defense, which is fascinating because it's like two separate ideologies merging. So I'm having a lot of fun there.
Well, we're gonna open it up to questions in a minute. Also wanted to give a shout out to some other board members that are diverse media people. Greg Miles, who's a TV person, and Conway Gittins, who's a Reuters TV veteran. And but also we're going to talk about books. How do you get a book deal? With myself, I did a work for hire book, so I didn't have to like go out and pitch it. The book was already, the publisher already wanted a book, and I wrote it for them. So that's like a dream, you know. And it's like, for me, a book was like a way to really stretch out, you know, just like let it run, you know. So that's my story with my book. My book came out in 2002, How America Made a Killing and Lost Its Shirt, story behind the numbers. Beth, you have a book coming out.
Yeah, my book came from a series of columns that I wrote at MarketWatch about taking care of my mom's finances when she got sick. And they were really popular when they came out. And I started to see that like people would find like one of them and then click through to all of the other ones. And I'm like, you know, there's no real thing that puts all of these financial tasks that you have to do to care for somebody together. Like there's no one compendium of them. You get little bits and pieces here and there. And nobody tells you what it really is like. And I thought, okay, there's my book. I've been waiting to have a book, you know, my entire career. I'm 52. You know, this could be my book. So I went for it and I pitched it. And you know what? Everybody in the country is my age right now, or you know, somewhere on the spectrum of dealing with parents or elderly relatives, and it's the hot topic of the moment. And you know, caregiving. Bradley Cooper's got a caregiving documentary. Like everybody's really talking about this right now, and so it sold. And you know, now pecking away on weekends and you know mornings. And
so you had to write a proposal or a sample chapter or anything like that?
Yeah, you have to write a proposal and a sample chapter. You got to get an agent.
Yeah.
It's a whole deal. You got to write something on your own proposal. Like somehow you have to mock it up. Like I networked a lot. I did my research as a reporter on how you do that, and then you got to get that proposal out to agents. And you got to get yourself an agent, and then you got to write the proposal the way they tell you to do it.
Your next book is going to be on time management, I think.
Well, you know, I always have a side hustle. The CFP took me 2 years of coursework and studying for the test, and like me being on the couch doing math problems, and my kids going, "Mom, mom, mom, mom." You know, like my brain was in standard deviations, and you know, they needed help with their homework, and like I always have something on the side. You know, it's kind of the mom hustle, maybe. Like there's a glass ceiling, but there's also a mom hustle.
And Jesse, give us a tale of how your book came around.
Yeah, well, I'd always wanted to do a book. I always aspired to do it and tried to find a topic and hadn't really hit on the topic that I wanted, you know, because the issue with a book is that you have to live with the same story for, you know, 2, 3, 4 years. And I get bored very easily, so I hadn't found that. And then the financial crisis came, and I thought that this was the cataclysm of a generation. I thought it would be with us for a long time, and it oddly has receded in some ways that I find kind of mysterious.
Just like COVID's kind of receded too.
Right, exactly.
Thank God.
And yet both have kind of lasting effects that you can see through culture. Anyway, so when we won the Pulitzer, it was for a series of a series on bad behavior from bankers, and we had exposed some specific bankers and hedge fund managers, and then I expected that they would be charged with some securities fraud, and they weren't, and this was very puzzling to me and quite outrageous. I'm easily outraged. I wake up very angry in the morning. And so, you know, I wrote a column. I was writing a column at the Times at the time about why this had happened, and then I still felt like I didn't have a good explanation, so I wrote a story for the New York Times Magazine on it while I was at ProPublica. And then I realized, you know, this is a topic where I can explain a lot more, and I'm very interested in it. So, you know, I did the same thing. Had an agent, wrote a proposal. The proposal was edited. It was edited again. Then we sold the book to Simon & Schuster. Then I had a very good, nice run. Took a leave for a year, wrote the book, revised it for a month after I had returned, and then published it. And did okay. Didn't sell the movie. Didn't sell the movie rights, but it was fine, well received, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was the most challenging, intellectually challenging project I'd ever done in my career, and so inspired to do it.
Okay, you guys have heard some great stories. Does anybody have a question at this point? I mean, we could go on. Greg Miles, you have a question? Can I use this over here?
Oh, I didn't mean to, okay.
Okay.
Sorry, Phil. Can you hear me? How's that?
Yeah.
I just want to ask each of you, there's all this talk of generative AI. Do you really feel, start with you, okay, David, put you on the hot seat. Do you really think that you need to master generative AI to be successful over the next 5 years?
We don't know
Be
yet.
competitive. I can't answer it.
Okay.
To be competitive over the next, of course, I can get along without it. First of all,
Okay, my microphone back there. I actually have taken pride in the fact that I've never entered a word in ChatGPT before, and because I feel like I go down slippery slopes sometimes, and if I start putting if it starts thinking for me, then I'll just get lazy and maybe I'll just not be a reporter anymore. Maybe it's a bad thing to say on camera, but
See how it ages.
huh?
We'll see how that ages.
Yeah.
Forbes,
Can you cut that out?
For bosses, do they say?
Well, actually, there's been an interesting case that just came up this week. My colleagues have been doing I think actually this underscores the conversation well. My colleagues put out an investigative report about Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO, and a drone project that he's been doing. And so Perplexity AI, which is this sort of wannabe OpenAI or Anthropic, they have this new product feature which is called, I can't even remember the name of it because it doesn't really matter, but basically it had repurposed all of our reporting, Forbes' reporting, and then they'd even used the illustration that we used, and then put it on their website as like a curated news site, and they had I think they ended up garnering more views on their curation than our story. I don't want to actually remove that, I don't know if it's totally accurate, but it did garner a lot of views on their website, which was concerning. And then they turned it into an AI-generated video, an AI-generated podcast, and they totally ran away with it. And today our editor-in-chief wrote an editorial targeting them, outlining just sort of how this is plagiarism. And I think that it's a good case that we should need to be incredibly wary of some of these applications. And I would open up the debate on that because OpenAI has been, snapping up contracts with news organizations left, right, and center.
That's because our news articles are form the knowledge base for ChatGPT, basically.
The big issue here is that Forbes, so there was no sourcing throughout this rewrite. People rewrite articles all the time, that's summaries, but Forbes wasn't mentioned anywhere through the story. And then there was a tiny logo hidden behind another logo of Forbes that you click on to maybe go to a link, and it just was, what we just call unacceptable. So.
Shelly, MarketWatch uses some AI. We've been using it for a few years. It's automated news stories that get, Boeing stock is at its highest level in a month or something like that, or Boeing is underperforming the market. It's like a 4-sentence story. So we've been doing those. And you mentioned I have 2 questions for you. Talk about AI at Bloomberg, and you mentioned that Bloomberg, the stories go everywhere. So how do you know if it's going to be a TV story or if it's going to be a magazine story, or because Bloomberg has all those properties. How does that work with the newsroom?
Yeah, so, AI is a big topic, obviously. On a micro level, I think how it can help journalists is that the way we use it is to free journalists up to do the thing that they're best at, which is thinking and sourcing and scooping. And so if you can no longer need anybody to sit there and retype financial filings, then that frees up a head count to then put them to do something else, to do what Jesse does, investigative, reporting or whatnot. It's really, or editing, that can really bring new stuff into the system. So Bloomberg has a huge automation department, training the models constantly to be able to do everything from SEC filings to economic data, and all of that. And so, if I want a one sentence line to say like the stock is up X% compared to the S&P 500, I no longer have to do that in my head. I can just click something and it'll pop that out for me. So that saves me time as a reporter. To me, that's amazing because it saves us time in doing those things that nobody really wants to waste their time doing. But what you're talking about is really concerning because that's talking about plagiarism, which is them just taking everything that we're doing and using it for their own purposes, and that also creates this sort of disinformation loop that is happening now where people don't really care where their stuff is coming from. They can't really trust the news, and then that further erodes people's trust in the news in general. So if you're seeing news written as in Chat GPT or even at the summaries at the top of that Google is doing now, to me that's concerning from a bigger perspective because then it erodes the sourcing and any sort of accountability for journalism and for your everyday reader, like they don't know where it came from, who said it, it's no trust, and then it further erodes its already quite eroded trust in journalism, additives. Those things really worry me about that. I think what the publications like the Wall Street Journal, Business Insider are trying to do with these deals with OpenAI is to head that off in a way and learn the mistakes that a lot of these places made when they made these deals with Google and Facebook and stuff at the beginning. I don't know, I'm not in those conversations. Bloomberg does not have a deal that I know of yet with OpenAI, but that's what my hunch is what they're trying to do.
And on the stories of the different medians in Bloomberg News, how does that kind of system work?
Yeah, so you pitch a story, you write a story. I mean, the terminal, Bloomberg Terminal is still, the hand that feeds you. So that's the most important customer for Bloomberg reporters. And then goes on the web. Everything goes on the web, and well, not everything, but a lot of things go on the web for our digital subscribers. And then some of our stuff is taken on TV, turned into radio or podcast or Business Week stories. It sort of runs, wherever it may go.
And sometimes TV reporters are interviewing CEOs, and sometimes reporters are interviewing CEOs, and then the video gets posted. So it's nice to see that,
Yeah, you just have to be willing and able to jump in and do whatever, and you learn all sorts of different avenues, and it's also good for people like you who get bored, because it keeps reporters there for a long time, because if you're bored with TV, you go write. If you're bored with writing, you do a podcast. If you're bored with a podcast, you do,
All right, well, we're coming to the end of our time limit. We got a question from Peter Coy.
Jesse, you talk about being bored easily and trying new things and jumping into stuff and experimenting, and that uses kind of one half of your brain, but then the other half of any journalist's brain is making sure the facts are right. So how do you balance those two things? How do you make sure that your articles are accurate, even when you're going into an area where it's new to you and you've never tried it before?
Yeah, hey Peter, good to see you. The advantage that ProPublica has is time and being able to think. So we try to be extraordinarily rigorous about our stories and our ideas, and I think the key to investigative journalism, which is a difficult and lonely business, is simultaneously believing in your story and disbelieving in your story. So you're constantly thinking, I know if I get this source to give me these documents that I have a chance to prove this thing out. This is a way that I can get this very difficult secret to uncover, to hold this entity accountable. But at the same time, I need to understand what are the limitations of these documents, what are the flaws in my thinking, what are the assumptions that I'm making that are probably wrong. So you want to kind of hold yourself to intellectual rigor to understand that when you're uncovering evidence, you're subject to all the human flaws of, and biases that anybody is. You don't have special talents because you call yourself an investigative reporter. And so it's a question of, conversations, trying to figure out what the flaws in your thinking are, testing them with your sources, testing them with your colleagues. And we're lucky that we don't really have to publish anything until it's ready. And so that's a real advantage.
And as an editor, how do you simultaneously motivate your reporters but also take them down to test their mettle?
Yeah, I mean, that's the key, is that you need to build them up. You really need to build them up and what I try to do is be a trustworthy sounding board. And be a supporter and back them. You want to back them back their ideas, back their dreams, back their aspirations, back them with their sources. They kind of enjoy if somebody is saying, "Let me talk to your editor," because they know that I'm not that fun to talk to. And you got to back them against with the editor-in-chief, you have to support them. At the same time, I'm just asking a million questions, and I'm just naturally very skeptical, and I'm also not afraid to ask stupid questions. And the key to being a good reporter and being a good editor is the fearlessness about asking stupid questions and not appearing to be stupid. And that was, my biggest flaw as an arrogant reporter, was that I demanded that people talk to me, and then I told them what I knew about a subject rather than listen. And then over time, I realized, actually, you should really listen. Ask them as many questions as you can, and actually try to listen to what they're telling you. And so I ask my reporters a million questions. And sometimes you find that problem, that they don't understand, that they don't give you a satisfying answer, and then you try to figure out, well, how can we get the satisfying answer? So it's sort of trust and support and a million questions bombardment.
I'm reminded of that show from the 70s, Columbo, when he seems like he's a bumbling fool, but he's actually got a steel trap mind.
Yeah, I mean, there are like two general in reporting techniques. One is pretending you know more than you do, and the other is pretending you know less than you do. And I completely went into the pretending you know less than you do mode. I just think it's much better.
Yeah. Jesse, let me just ask one last question, one more question. One form of media that we haven't touched on that's growing is media outlets from nonprofits. So ProPublica is a nonprofit. Is it different working for a nonprofit than it is for a commercial company? You mentioned you mentioned earlier that you have a lot of time to work on stories, and it's not going to be out until it's ready. Can you just talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, we're not completely insulated from the marketplace. We have some audience pressures because we want to have impact for our stories, but we're almost entirely, compared to any commercial place, we're almost entirely insulated from any of those pressures. So I don't really give a shit about audience. I write the things that I'm interested in and hope that they'll make an impact. And of course, we need donors, and we need diversified donors. And ProPublica has been enormously successful through very little of my part, through gathering donors, but it's not a panacea for journalism. The nonprofit sector is never going to replace the for-profit sector. With each iteration, it gets more dangerous because you have billionaires, and billionaires turn out not to be benevolent. I think of us as mainly getting money from benevolent oligarchs, and they keep me away from them because I say, oh, it was up to me, I would investigate you first. Don't make that joke when you're meeting with donors, please. And so, we've diversified so that we're less dependent on any one billionaire or wealthy person, but there are all sorts of fraud issues with nonprofits, and you're seeing kind of wave. It was the hot thing a few years ago, and now you're seeing the reckoning there too. So we're not insulated from that. But ProPublica is actually doing pretty well.
I would like to see more nonprofits, you know, especially in the local news. I know there's a paper in New Bedford, Massachusetts that's a nonprofit. There's also one in Montclair, my hometown. It's a weekly. Montclair Local is a nonprofit. So I'd like to see more of that, you know. And I guess NPR is a nonprofit as well, so it's a good thing. All right, Beth, quick question for you. You are a bit of a cottage industry. You also have a newsletter. You have your expertise as a financial advisor. Any advice to share on managing different media simultaneously? And panelists, feel free to throw in any comments on any other side projects or interests that we haven't touched on.
Get yourself a teenager. My teenager has taught me how to use social media. And mostly, she's the hardest editor I've ever had. I get a lot of, you're doing it wrong. But she has taught me a lot and increased my Instagram presence and you know, my other social media. We'll get to TikTok eventually. I just don't trust it quite yet.
MarketWatch has TikTok
Yeah,
videos.
MarketWatch has
I did a
TikTok.
couple of those, yeah.
But I've always done multimedia stuff, mostly on the guerrilla side. You know, all along when you're working in startups and they say, you know, we should have some video. What they mean is you should go out and do video and figure it out how to do it yourself. And so I did. And so I've always just sort of jumped in there and figured out what it was. Started a YouTube channel. When I was at Reuters, we just jumped in. They were like, hey, you know, you could go do Facebook Lives. And we just invited the universe in and did Facebook Lives with them. The best one I did was an in-studio interview on Facebook Live with Big Poppy.
Oh yeah, the baseball player, yeah.
Like
That sucks.
why we were like interviewing him for the retirement section, I don't know. At this point anymore, it was years ago, but like you just go. You know, I'm not a person who likes to be on camera. I don't like to talk to people in groups and stuff like that, but you just sort of have to do it, and so you just forge ahead and do it all.
Yep. Don't let yourself get pigeonholed, but you have to keep your boss happy at the same time. So you kind of gotta multitask, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, the bosses are kind of happy with it. Like, I'm
Yeah.
doing this panel tonight, I have a panel tomorrow, like, you know, a video here, a video there, you know, like, they want that audience reach, because the audience isn't where it used to be, and you have to go and find them. And if you want to keep your job, I've been laid off a lot of times, if you want to keep your job, you gotta keep your audience. And you can't wait for them to come to you anymore. It just doesn't work that way.
And part of your skills as a reporter, I think, is to know about your own internal organization and to see if there's any changes coming down the pipe that may affect you. So that's one thing I've done, and I think you've done that too. I guess we're running low on time. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Chris Taylor.
Yes. Can we talk about newsletters for a second? It seems like everyone has them these days.
Chris has one.
Do we see
What's the
potential?
name of your newsletter, Chris?
Cutting Room Floor.
Cutting Room Floor. Yeah, we'll give it a plug. Why not?
Okay. So do we see potential there? Do we think that there's a million of them and most of them are going to go away? Is there monetization here that's going to make sense for individuals or for organizations? What do we think about newsletters?
When I did my reporting on the book process, what all the authors I talked to told me is that you need your own audience, and you get that in a newsletter. And I thought it was having a podcast, because everybody I know who has a podcast got a book deal. And then I thought, okay, it's your Instagram presence, which is why I wanted to go and beef up my Instagram, because all it was at that point was pictures of my dog. And so I started to work on that, and then they're all telling me, yeah, that's all passé. The podcast, the Instagram, your social media presence. Nobody even asked about any of that stuff in my book process. But the newsletter, where you have your own audience and they are subscribing to you because they're interested in what you have to say, apparently those are the people who will buy a book. So when it came to the book, that was what the publisher was like most interested in me having. And so basically my newsletter is source requests and recipes from my mother's recipe files. You know, it's nothing, yours is much more reported and more like a Substack. And it has like real stuff in it. Like mine is more like a, you know, like for my friends and family who might buy the book, for them to know when they can get the coupon deal.
I love newsletters. I feel like they're really meant for real reporters. Like you can be successful with a small group of really caring readers. Like people really want to read your newsletter and they're going to open it. You're going directly, you're speaking directly to them, and you don't have to cater, you know, to the audience. Like the audience, the capital A, you know, sort of focus on your audience, and they're coming to you for the stuff that you have to offer, and they just can write back. They can write back, and that's very cool.
So like just to add as well, as a business model, I know a lot of reporters who have left their solid jobs at big places and then they double, triple, quadruple what they were making. I mean, if you want to make money, I don't know if that's what it is, but on Substack, there's like a lot of really successful who, they make the newsletters and they build the conferences around those newsletters, and then there's a community, and then all of a sudden the newsletter writer is the center of this community that, you know, has a lot of advantages.
Yeah, another thing that's happening too is podcasts are becoming live events. So you can sell tickets to a podcast, which is pretty cool. So people come and do that too. I don't know if that's been in financial journalism as much, but other types of journalism. Finfluencers. Okay, good. Another catchphrase. You know, we're with a bunch of journalists. We got catchphrases going on. That's great.